the book, the Return in Arabic, and you are of course welcome to stay. As this meeting is so suitable for speaking in an open forum and questions from the audience, that I think that we can all participate in this, and we're all part of one big round table together. And so the speakers will begin their summaries, and you are going to be part of those summaries. You are well invited to say what you want to say and respond. You can present questions or make remarks. The question that I presented was, how could we summarize these 2 days, this conference? And we really didn't have any particular idea of how to do so. We didn't have a clear set idea. What we know is that there is a kind of confusion between where we are, where reality is, what would like to be in the future perhaps. At the end of the conference, and particularly for the people who participated in the full 2 days, and in 2-3 hours they will go back to their reality. They'll leave this place and go back to their reality outside, and the reality outside is different from the one here in this auditorium. So I would like to tell you this world looks so clean, so organized, so pure. It's as if we're completely disconnected from what's happening outside, but it was realized that while we're here, we are managing to influence reality. First of all, we have an open line broadcast for the entire 2 days of the conference on the internet, and it's broadcast to the entire world. We have 413 viewers yesterday, or in last count, just a little while ago, and we had people who constantly part of the taking a documentation of the through camera feed. Also, Facebook worked constantly throughout the last 48 hours, and not only through Zochrot, only the people of Zochrot entered that, and also the people who were in this hall who helped us to disseminate this information to the world. Arbeid also wrote something, he wrote a post and so forth. Yesterday, Salman Natour was here and also said something very beneficial. So it's very, very interesting. Most of the reactions talked about what's happening here and said that what's happening here is special, is unique. In the outside world reality, they don't use these words, this terminology that we use, and they're not trying to discuss the future the way in which we discuss the future. This is all thanks to you and thanks to what you have said. The people outside have understood why we're here. Suddenly, people understand why there are always soldiers in the train when he goes from Haifa to here. He finally connected this to the fact that this society is a military society and there are military bases everywhere. Salman Natour was brought to tears. He was so moved by the fact that, he said he comes to conferences everywhere, but the depth that you presented, the depth of the discussion, the range, is not something to be taken for granted. The confusion that I had, that on the other hand, it's fantastic, we talked, okay, that's great. That was something that was admirable, but how can we transform what happened here, the discussions? Some of you are academians, some of you are researchers, some of you activists. How can we take what happened here and translate it to actual reality? How can we take these ideas, these dreams, these visions into a political plan, for example, something that can be worked with and something that can help change reality? Those who would like to begin with this question and with this wondering question. The languages, as we said, all languages are accepted. Just please announce ahead what language you're going to talk about in.
I will speak in English. I hope that's fine. I was just drafting some comments for the discussion here, and maybe we can it can be a starting point for us, and then we see where the discussion leads us. Roughly speaking, I identified three trends or themes that we're running through the last 2 days. But I'm quite biased and unobjective, and because I work for Badil and I presented yesterday, so I will try to reiterate also the things that I said yesterday accordingly. So in my view, if we want to take the brilliant participations and contributions that were given yesterday here and today, and to process them, which I think this roundtable is attempting to do, and then try to process it and then take it to further, we need to identify some things, the core ideas, and then we can take them into practice, the theory and practice duality. The first thing that I think wasn't dealt enough with in the last 2 days was Zionism as an ideology, as the energy, the solar power that runs the system of forcible displacement of Palestinians, colonization, apartheid, and all the other things that we have described in the last 2 days. I think we need to work on understanding Zionism and the way we can actually work towards resisting it and dismantling it altogether. Along with bringing up Zionism as a crime, basically, I was thinking yesterday that basically one day Zionism as a term will be coined and it will be equalized to apartheid. People will no longer say apartheid in Palestine. They will say Zionism existed in Palestine. And I think this is the kind of work that we need to achieve here. And I think that is one of the most important things that I come out with this conference, that Zionism is a crime and it will be termed like this, and we will start using it as such. Alongside this, I thought that we should take the holistic approach that I described yesterday in my presentation, and I think it has a utility in the sense that if we take this holistic approach, it will lead to a unified language and unified discourse and unified terminology that dismantles the walls and the categories that Israel is imposing legally, politically, and militarily. And then we can start working together, not as Palestinian NGOs who work on Area C and Palestinian NGOs, Israeli NGOs who work only within a green line, and all these small mandated organizations. And when we start to see the whole problem as the problem of colonizing Palestine or Zionizing Palestine, therefore we can deal with it collectively, each one in their own place, and then we can work together against it. That unifies us. Sorry if I spoke too much.
It's all right. Thank you. For this round, you can talk 2 minutes for this round, and Allegro.
Okay. So then.
When is the time for questions from the audience, please? No, we'll read that.
אני מצטערת, we don't get...
Speak in English for the translators. First, again, I really want to thank the organizers for it's an experience, I have to say. And there were times I was moved to tears by some of the footage or the testimonies. So it's been very important for me to be here. And I'm a lawyer, and I've been very active legally. But it's been quite a long time that I've been active politically. So I've been working in the UN for many years. But I also want to reiterate what I had said yesterday, because it seems to me, I do think, Zochrot, what you were saying, is 2 steps forward from the political, ahead of the political movements and the political organizations. What you're doing here is way ahead of what I see, especially in the Palestinian areas, what the Palestinian political movements are doing. I mean, we're in a real lull it's nice what Bishop Tutu says, but it's a very depressing time, and there's no vision. There's really no vision, vision that offers hope. There's just the current faulty peace process. So what I would say in terms of thinking about how to put this all together, I still think, Auda, the return it's a critical element, but it's part of this larger picture of liberating this area from all the oppression, and it's a key to getting to that liberation. And so this work is critical, but for me, it has to happen in a political context. There needs to be a political movement parallel, working with Auda, but people need to move because, we've already developed some wonderful models, but it's not going to happen unless we change the political context, in my mind. And that's why, we need to start thinking, also putting our efforts in political movement. There are budding groups, and maybe that is the place where people should think about putting efforts in, but it has to turn into something more mass. It can't just be fringe, and can't just be a small group of very well-intentioned people. And I think in order to make it a mass, and mass is really just appealing to both the Palestinian and Israeli populations to get them to realize that actually, for example, as one state is actually preferable than the current situation, and rights could be implemented and liberation will happen. But I think we have some tools here that can be used for both populations. On the Jewish side, and I spoke about it yesterday, I see one of the biggest obstacles for Israeli Jews to think politically ahead, one state, equal rights, is the fear of the unknown, because until now it just hasn't been depicted. What the next day, when the one state is set up, when there's equal rights, what will happen to the Israeli Jew? What will happen to his or her house, his livelihood, his language? That needs to be addressed. And I think this model, the models here were carefully, I don't know if it was intentional or not, but they keep the border in terms of they didn't go over into the kibbutz, the nearby kibbutz, and there was a lot of discussion about that. And intentional or not, to me, that's one way to allay a fear of uprooting. What you had mentioned is fantastic. I mean, I think that's a really interesting way to approach that fear. So I think there have been some suggestions put forward that I think could be put into a political frame that political people can use as ways to address the masses. And again, I'm not talking about, going out in a demonstration and offering these plans, but what I was really saying yesterday is that we need to go out personally and go to house meetings and community events and talk to people and have dialogue. And here were presented some options to address that. On the Palestinian side, I also think what was offered here, some very even more I think on the Palestinian side, what was offered here is very powerful because of the lack of vision, because of the depression, just the apathy. I somehow feel that within 48, there's more going on, and it may not even think it's political, but I find it very political, than actually in terms of in where I live, in the Bethlehem area. So I think on the Palestinian side, especially in the West Bank, I think these, the people working on these Audna projects are providing concrete examples. That's one of the biggest obstacles when people talk about one state in Palestinian areas. Most people roll their eyes and say it's utopian, not realistic. How are we ever going to get there? And here are some realistic, concrete proposals that give hope that living in a camp is not the end game, and our role is not to rehabilitate a camp, but our role is to get out of the camp and stop being refugees. And here are some ideas, which I think are very appealing. So practically, again, you and I spoke, but I would like to put on the table that invitation for some of these projects and presentations to come to Bethlehem and to meet with the people on the ground. There are lots of camps in Bethlehem.
Okay. Okay, you passed the 2 minutes, but even that I want to ask you just to add something. You said that in the small talks, the gap between what is going on here and the situation in the camps.
Yeah.
You said something that the people in the camps are very frustrated and they don't have the opportunity to think in this way or to see this future.
I can't speak for all the camps, but from my experience and people I speak to, it's one reason is that I think the resources haven't been put out there. I mean, the urban planning, the thinking about, just the technical parts haven't been are not available or haven't been put together by anybody to say, let's think about how we're going to do return to this village. We need an urban planner, we need a community organizer, we need this. Even that, the first steps of how to even do it, I don't think, and people who are here from the other camps can correct me if I'm wrong, are not there, but I think there's an interest. I mean, and I think it fills in a huge political vacuum, because again, especially in the camps, when you start showing practical ways of thinking about Auda, I think that generates a lot of political discourse on the big picture as well.
Thank you. No.
אני אדבר בעברית.
I will talk in Hebrew.
טוב, לפני שאני אתחיל...
Before I begin, I would just say, first in regards to the first thing that was said here, in regards to the need to focus on Zionism. As a person who is not connected to Zionism in any way and practically resisting Zionism, I do think that even Israelis and also Palestinians need to talk and think about what Zionism is, because Zionism is different for many different people. Zionism is not one thing. It's not just a regime. It's not that we want to change. Zionism, many people is many different things, depends on who you talk to and different parts of Israeli society. For some people it's patriotism, for others they remember mental or spiritual Zionism as a... And no, I don't think you can resist that. I think this also connects to... I'll try to be brief. Okay. I'm going to continue Allegra. Allegra talked about vision, and on the one hand the need for vision, and on the other hand the need for mass movement and talking to many people. I think that this connection, or these two sides, they're also my answer to the question that you gave us in the beginning of the panel, meaning I am a political activist. My political party it presents through Juan, who's also here. I presented through my political party to my other political party members several of the ideas that have been presented here. But oftentimes what's underneath the surface is people tell me, you're a bunch of intellectuals. You sitting amongst yourself, you're so happy and content with your ideas, you don't talk to the public, you're not connected, you're totally with yourself, you just go up and up and up in terms of theory and professionalism, but you have no contact with the ground. And I say in response, you need that, there's a need for this. There's a need for that in the conceptual arena, such things exist. There's a need that thinkers of all sorts of fields and all sorts of kinds can roll ideas together of what are we fighting for, what is injustice, what is redemption, and on the other hand, on the same token, you can't give up the masses. So I think the problem of many, and now I'm a bit pretentious, I admit, but I think many people's problem, of many of the thinkers, many of the professionals, maybe of the philosophers, is that it's not nice to be active in a mass movement. Mass movements, there are power plays and politics and corruption and you know, there's a lot of unpleasant things that aren't nice, and a lot of people you don't agree with. And I think, yes, it's our job not to give up the mass movements, but to be here, exist here in this place that is 2 steps ahead of the mainstream, and go with this to the mass movements. Everybody, I'm not going to tell you my political party, but everybody can go wherever they want. But everybody should find a place in which they can talk with more and more people that don't hear what they're saying, and connect where they can, and where you can't connect. Puritanism is, in my opinion, is essentially flawed, is a problem. Thank you, Noah. Thank you for your remarks. I'd like to support your remarks.
In English now, I want to refer to what you just said about Zionism and apartheid. Also a big question in our Cape Town discussions. I must say that personally, I think I had quite a few arguments with Umar about it, or with Palestinians in general. Zionism has a lot of apartheid characteristics, but there's one key characteristic they do not share in common. The Jewish link to the land we call Israel or Palestine is something that pre-existed Zionism, will probably not go away. I think that denying that very deep emotional, religious, whatever you call it, essentialist attachment will not do the Palestinians, the Palestinian cause any good, will not do anyone any good. I think there was also, I think Dov here spoke about love. I'm not sure. I think that's a bit dangerous. I mean, I don't believe I have to give up any part of my identity so that others will be my neighbors. I think that being neighbors is a key term. We are able to be different and yet live together. We do not have to fall in love. We do not have to deny our identities. We can continue being who we are or who we perceive ourselves to be. That's one more thing. I would like to add another subject, another topic for the lawyers among you. I think it was Audre Lorde, correct me if I'm wrong, who said you cannot dismantle the master's house with the master's tools. What do you think about it?
Okay, Munir. Yeah.
رح أجاوب بالعربي. أنا مش كتير يعني
I don't really understand the real ways to influence the political arena, in answer to your question, by the way, but I do feel that Zochrot, through this conference, that to the best of my understanding can be the first conference of this size in which there are Jews talking about right of return. Jews, not just Jews, but Arabs as well. You mean an Israeli institution? It's the second conference, but the first conference was also by Zochrot, by the way. So yes, this in and of itself makes me feel optimistic, because the conference was held, and here we are summing it up. And this certainly makes me feel optimistic, because I feel that Zochrot is normalizing the idea of return among Israelis. And this can be the kind of normalization that we need in order to, that we should be seeking for, instead of the other kind of normalization, which is so criticized and has been so criticized in our struggle. And this reminds me, I felt optimistic throughout this conference. It's not the first step, but for Zochrot maybe, but it's certainly a fantastic step in the right direction. And this reminds me of a poem in Hebrew, a song. And I'm going to move now to Hebrew, a song that I know, and I remember it in Istanbul. I recall this song. And it reminds me of this poem, "You and I will change the world." I want to ask you another question in regards to the Palestinians. We said earlier that the political bodies and the official bodies in the Palestinian Authority aren't doing anything for the return of refugees. I can talk with other people about this. I can talk to everybody. So apart from the PA and Abu Mazen, even in this framework, this conference, the discussion between Zochrot and the Association for the Protection of Human Rights of Internal Displaced People, none of them were presented here and participated in this conference actively. And this is as a result of their position on the issue and their very detailed position. And this is what I'm going to ask you. The questions that will be presented on this level in regards to the future and the vision of return and the planning of return, this requires Palestinians to give answers that they believe these answers are precede that should be based on, first of all, the acknowledgement of Israelis of the right of return. And they make a political stance. They said, first of all, we want acknowledgement. We want Israelis to acknowledge our rights. And then concessions should be made. I don't see where these concessions should be done as a president. I think that legal specialists that have participated here in this conference have worked on the issue of return, worked to promote it, and worked for other rights, obviously in regards not only to return but other things. And this is something that there's no concession here. If somebody lives in a house in this land, and even if they're a conqueror, certainly they have rights. They have, and the rights of people returning to their house don't annul the rights of the people who already live in the area or have lived in the area since. I don't see any reason for the fear of dealing with this issue. I don't see why we should be afraid of it, and I don't think there should be any concessions. I think that this conference dealt with the exchange of ideas, people coming up to the stage, and yes, there are people I disagreed with, there are people who I felt that I agreed with. That's fine, as if we work together. That's fine. That is the nature of conferences. You agree with some, you don't agree with others.
In English. I jotted down basically a couple of things that I was hearing that kept maybe appearing throughout the 2 days, some themes that kind of raise questions about thinking in the future about the kind of work, how to work, the focus. And to start, and maybe the most immediate one was how to work on the issue of return related to 1948 in the context of ongoing displacement. What is the connection with the kind of initiatives that we heard from that are inspiring? Is there some way that those can inform responses to ongoing displacement that are more immediate politically, perhaps, and allow for more immediate moments for activities to organize, mobilize around, and then can be connected up to the larger issue of dealing with return from 1948. So that's one issue. The second one was this whole issue of what return means. I think someone once, an article referred to through discussions with refugees that when refugees talk about return, it actually encompasses a bundle of rights, many different things. So in terms of dealing with return, how does that inform? And we heard a bit of that in some of the different things from just issue of return in terms of going back, the issue of return and property, the issue of long-term integration and rehabilitation. And that latter one is something that, in fact, in general, for refugees, it's not paid much attention to. Once people go back home, there's very little attention to scholars. There's a few scholars that have addressed it. In general, UN agencies that are dealing with returns of refugees kind of lose interest after a while in dealing and monitoring those things and seeing 5-10 years down the road, what's the situation? Another issue that came up, and a number of people asked it, how do we measure? And the question is then, should we know that in advance? How do we measure how return is going to be successful? Is it simply going back? Is all these other issues? And if we know that in advance, what kind of measures are important, then we can kind of deal with that in advance in terms of how we strategize and work towards return and include activities related to those things. People have already mentioned this need of, or this question of how to create political will. Translation, I don't have any, but that's a huge question. My question related to that is the practical initiatives that we heard about today. How do those inform? How do they create political will? Do they create political will? Mm-hmm. And in what way, and with what communities, and with what actors? Who should be exposed to those? And how can we, in terms of partnerships, should activities simply be focused at the level of civil society? Or should they be seeking out, it's very unlikely that state officials themselves who are involved in the official process have an ear for activities, but there are always, in other cases you can look at in refugees where people sought out officials who were perhaps removed 1 or 2 steps from a political process, but were sympathetic. And how can you find those people, build alliances, expose them, create awareness about these kinds of initiatives, practical ways of approaching it, in order to kind of slowly build a network, a broader network at different levels. Another issue was what levels of work, at what levels should work be happening, and what are the connections, and how do they connect? So from the local, we heard about the need to move to a national level, regional, and a little bit about international. So how do we do that? Is it valuable? Who should do it?
You have any idea?
I'm simply raising questions at this point, but it's something just to focus on and to identify which areas are important to strategize and to think more about. And there's perhaps some lessons learned from other experiences. And the last one would be spaces in which to work. Should this work simply happen inside Israel, in the Palestinian authorities, West Bank, Gaza, to use the term that you mentioned before? Inside, people mentioned the idea of refugee host countries and the trouble of trying to find. One of the things that came to mind was with the urban planning. It's interesting that urban planning is being used both in relation to 1948 refugees, but also camp rehabilitation and reconstruction. So a question that came to my mind is then, are activists who have been involved, for example, in camp rehabilitation, reconstruction in Lebanon, also interested perhaps, can be interested because you have that common area on which you're working around?
Okay, thank you. Leila?
Sure. I just want to maybe relate a few of my takeaways and preface it with the reflection or observation that this was mostly an Israeli Jewish forum, and that's okay. It's both okay and it's a problem. I think it's okay because I think if return is to be realized and if we are to see a real transformation, Israeli Jews have to be a part of this process. I've frequently talked to refugees, Palestinian refugees, who think, well, no, all that really has to happen is that we have to be able to come across the border. But as we've discussed here, the idea of return is a much more complex one because it's about how communities will interrelate. It's about how institutions, laws will be changed. It's about where people will live, how they will live, under what identity. And we just began to scratch the surface of these issues. But the Israeli Jewish community has to be a part of this conversation. And so I think that this is a great effort, but there's also a problem in that the refugees themselves are not included. And that's a structural problem, and one that we really need to aim to get over. At the same time, I think that perhaps there are different conversations and discussions that need to happen within an Israeli Jewish or an Israeli realm and a Palestinian one. And so while sometimes we may be frustrated with what we're hearing from the other side or not hearing, we have to realize that there are two different, or multiple actually probably, tracks of discussion that have to go on until we actually get to a moment in time where rights can be fully realized. That said, my main takeaway from this conference, which I am very excited about, is that I now see return as both an act and a consciousness. And the act was exemplified by the person from Zochrot, who, we're seeing these kids, these communities of youth who are actually going and returning to their former villages, and are doing it in a very committed way, at great risk, and they should be commended. And that's the act, and that's an important effort to get behind. But return is also a consciousness, because because so much will have to be changed in order for it to happen. And it may not happen as a reconstruction of the villages as we saw. It will probably be a much more complex situation, with some refugees choosing, some refugees not choosing to come back, people living in different ways, and I think under different identities and in different configurations. And so I think one important factor of this conference is that we were allowed to talk about return as a problematic in a space where that doesn't necessarily mean you're giving up the right to return. So you can debate what that means to you without feeling pressured to say that I'm actually saying it's not an important part of the cause or of my rights. So I think it's important to continue these discussions and to build the consciousness of return as something more than just what 194 says, but something that people can relate to as individuals within their current spaces and within what could be their future ones.
Okay, thank you. And this round, the last one is Mariana.
After Mariana, there will be time for questions from the audience.
English, thank you. Like I have any other option. So thank you. First, I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me again, because I really didn't expect this conference to be this overwhelming and informative and especially emotional on so many ways. And I thought that, when you are living in a sort of a frozen conflict, or get out of the conflict, and coming from the region with so many crimes, you think that there are no more emotions for anything else, but this was very emotional. I have one thing in my mind, and I was inspired also yesterday, but also today, by Noah and Ari, what they spoke about, this Cape Town process and some practical solutions and experience of others. And as Leila said, is this only a return to across the border, or is this process should be much more than that? And I do see this as especially to be the duty of a civil society, both here in Israel, but also in Palestine, to Palestinian civil society organizations to think about the next steps. What immediately after the return? And I think that if this kind of future planning is lost, then I think that situation can be resulted only with return, and that's it. And that can be very dangerous potentially. And I think that civil society, especially through a wide consultation process with different actors, not only with human rights organizations, but also with refugees, also to go to camps, to talk to people, to organize some sort of like a consultation meetings, to ask them, what's next? What do you want after the return? What do you expect after the return? Before coming here, and that's the other thing I wanted to raise, reading the literature about this area, I always thought that the major problem is basically the truth, the knowledge. However, in the last 2 days, I don't think that is the problem. I think there is a knowledge. There is enough knowledge about what happened in 1948. However, I think that the first issue that needs to be tackled immediately during the process of return is the question of acknowledgement. And sort of a parallel truth process that needs to go parallel with the process of return that would provide for the acknowledgement. So the official acknowledgement of what happened. Mm-hmm. So that's for now.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Actually, the conference is, from truth to redress. Yeah, one step further, and I'm wondering if we, as we say always at Zochrot, 10 years from today, we want to see the public talking about return, and I'm wondering now if we want them only to talk about return or to act for return, because we today already saw some actions for real and practical return. أسئلة من الجمهور إذا في
10% of Palestinians are not in the near Shatat or in Palestine now. They're in the US, Canada, the UK, and the Gulf. Okay? Palestinians close to here are under the gun sometimes of anti-return forces, secret police in Jordan, etc. They're under the gun of violent pro-return forces in southern Lebanon and in southwest Palestine. What would be the blocks to, like Allegra was saying, of starting to involve more people in outside the Green Line in planning? What about going to the populations that are in Europe or in the US or in Canada in the Gulf, where they might not have immediate reprisals if they were Skyping, to be involved in peaceful return groups? Is that an option at all?
Thank you. Ali.
يعني أحيانا الواحد ينظر إلى ما يحصل في واقع الحياة.
People look at what happened in life's reality, and we cannot save even one house about to be demolished. We cannot take down a roadblock in the West Bank, and these are small, minor things. And here we're talking about a plan and the return to the villages and to the towns and cities. And yet, I look at this topic from a historic perspective. I believe in the course of history. I believe that the nations, especially the Arab nations in the Middle East, have gotten rid of all the regimes that control them. And what happened in South Africa is an example of what can happen. I believe that these kinds of things, these kinds of meetings are very important. I attended the conference in Haifa that was about return and justice and a just return, and there we talked about culture and emotions and understandings. Here we're talking about people who came with plans. we're feeling much more care and much greater interest, and that's good. Well, the issue of Zionism, if Zionism isn't the problem, then who's the problem? Where's the problem? And these explanations, when they try to explain Zionism as connected to the identity even before Zionism, Arabs and Jews lived together without Zionism, and there was never a problem with the Jewish religious identity. The Jewish oral law, the halacha, was written by the great sages within the Arab culture. Jews prayed in Palestine. They could uphold all the rituals in Palestine. Zionism harmed the Jews because it turned the Jews from an Arab, just like you have a Muslim Arab and a Christian Arab and a Baha'i Arab and a heretic Arab or a secular Arab. It turned the Jewish Arabs into enemies. And this poses some question marks. Ofra? Yes, perhaps I will also address the Zionist issue. And it's not an emotional matter. I want to see any Zionist who's willing to forgo the privileges of the Jews, to forsake the law of return, to accept the right of return. If Zionism is only about loving the land of Israel, then that's fine, but that's not it. It is a military system which oppresses. And now I'd like to refer to a theme that's been a leitmotif, and I truly respect that in Zochrot and Allegra mentioned that as well. It's very important for the Israelis not to be afraid. I remember back in the days when I was a Zionist wing leftist, I remember that the Jews really fear their condition. But now I think, hold on, every bully who does an act of bullying does it because he's scared. Somebody beats somebody or kills somebody because they fear. I think it's more important to say to the Israelis today that they are really scary and to stop using euphemisms. I think that even the word occupation is a euphemism. Something is occupied right now. It is taken. No, but we have a much stronger and more accurate words than this. We have regimental violence that is being conducted every day. This concept to operate through parties in the Knesset, everyone with their constituencies. I mean, we were all there, but I think the way we think now, me and some of my friends, we view ourselves as people who are dissidents to the regime, dissident of what's going on here. There is no option to be a party in the Knesset, even with a platform that's identical to the American Constitution, because Israel doesn't recognize any party that doesn't support a Jewish party. So think about it. It's time to resist the regime. Yes. I have a question and a comment. The question is for Zochrot and the organizers of the conference. I refer the question to them, thinking about the possibility of a return and amongst the people. Is it easier to spread these opinions amongst the DPs who see the village, the displaced village next to them, or with the Palestinian who can't see it but only imagine? What, you're asking this question to Zochrot? Where are you from? From the Daesh refugee camp in Deir Rafah. And the second question is, what is Zochrot's responsibility towards the Palestinians who are refugees in the camps? So we see that Zochrot is very active. We see this conference, and it's important to have Palestinian refugees who have the right to visit the villages. And another question or a comment regarding what Allegra said, the idea, internalizing the idea of the option of return in the refugee camps, and to think about how we can return and thinking practically about return. This is something that isn't being discussed in the refugee camps. It doesn't exist. It's missing, perhaps because of the multiplicity of institutions which exist in the refugee camps. There are certain restrictions always, and there's a fear. There aren't any serious people who talk about it. I started out with my family. I started talking with my mother and grandmother and to discuss it with them, to discuss the fact that we need to start thinking that we must go back. The thought is to go back and see the lands of my village, and the different generations need to agree amongst themselves that it's the same goal. So, yes, please.
I will accept any term that Palestinian will say about Zionism. I really understand. I'm a historian. But I want to offer my Palestinian friends to be much more deeper and much more sophisticated when declaring, saying like this, because during the Second World War, we can say that maybe dozens of states, it can be called crimes, American crimes, German crimes, Russian crimes, and so on. And that was the context, historical context, that the Zionism built and fought for the establishment of Israel and made the Nakba. So I want to say that I offer my Palestinian friends to go deeper also to the Jewish history, modern Jewish history. Because, for example, my father was an American soldier, Jewish American soldier, and fought against the Germans. After the Second World War, he took and treated 100,000 refugees, Jews, from the concentration camps, and nobody wanted to accept them. And international committee was investigating what they wanted, and they wanted Israel, wanted Palestine. And he helped them to come to Israel, and he was probably a Zionist. And I don't think I will die one day saying that by him helping 100,000 refugees from the camps to come to Israel or to Palestine was a crime. So just think about it, maybe go deep into it. Another point of historical deepness would be...
Please short, Dov. Make it short, please.
Yeah, thank you. Another and different kind of thought would be why it's important to go to the terrible history of the Jews in the Second World War, because, for example, the concept of Judaizing the Galilee or Judaizing Israel or Judaizing the Negev is very, very close to the concept of Arization, which the Germans did. Arization Germany, Arization the territories that the German captured. So there is really good reasons and sophisticated reason and also truth-seeking reasons for the Palestinian to study the modern history of the Jews more deep. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Abdani.
I would like to make 2 points quickly. One, I want to go back. A conference like this is, of course, wonderful. It's been a fantastic 2 days. But all the people who registered to come to this conference were those with a good deal of knowledge and awareness of the problem to begin with. And also going to house parties or whatever you want to call them in English. The people who come are those who are aware already or partially aware. One of the main problems is getting to the ordinary Israeli, what is called in English the man in the street, also the woman. People, I as an activist in Women in Black for over 20 years, every week out there on the street, I know how they react. And we are not getting through to them. We have to think of more creative ways to get through to those who would never think of registering for a conference like this. That's one point. The second point is, I'm going to repeat or go back to something that I said yesterday. At this conference, we have not touched on the matter of economics, the fact that Israel is a very strong technological economy, and Israel has not allowed the Palestinian economy over the 65 years and over certainly the 46 years of in the West Bank, Israel has not allowed the Palestinian economy to develop in the same way, and I would like to see more said about that and more. I'm not an expert, but I certainly would like to hear some more about how to deal with the economic problem.
Thank you very much. So we don't have time, but make it just telegraphic, okay? Please.
I'll try, I promise. Kusai from the Hesh refugee camp, campus in camps. And thinking in the 2 days that I've spent here, I've heard, I'm seeing that the whole concern, or the most concern, is informing the Israeli community that there's no fear of implementing right of return, and about your identity and about your country, and there's space for Palestinians to return, as it's a mathematical issue, and we have to do the calculation, whether the expenses or the housing. And I was just crossed my mind is, and thinking of that, and in relation to that, and the other side, and the Palestinian side, I would think of a Palestinian who would think of return and having an Israeli as a neighbor, while for the past time knowing an Israeli as a soldier standing on a checkpoint. That's the only image of an Israeli. How would we work with that? At this tension, besides the calculation tension. The other thing is, when we talk about return of refugees, and I used to have the idea before also about returns and different kinds of returns, we need to take an example. In each Eid, Israeli government allows for Palestinians to have permissions to enter to Israel. And mostly we see Palestinians goes to Haifa, Jaffa, they don't go to their original villages or destroyed villages. What do we call that? And is it type of return, even if it's through a permission to that? Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I think we need to have more debate about Zionism, and our Jewish Israeli friends should really understand Palestinians' feelings about this. I was speaking yesterday about slogans we learned in Fatah movement. One of the other slogans we learned or we were taught is that not every Jew is a Zionist, and not every Zionist is a Jew. And I wrote an article a few years ago as to who is responsible to the Palestinian tragedy. Is it the Jews or the Zionists? So, if someone wants to see Zionism as sort of cultural movement, we don't have any problem with that. But what the problem is with the colonialist nature of Zionism, which the father of Zionism, Herzl, was very clear about. This is the problem. Okay. So you should dissociate, what...
It's clear, yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Shukran. Okay. I am aware that many questions will remain open question. We don't have answers for each question, but we don't also have time to answer each question. So please, we take some 2 or 3 comments from you and finish here.
Since I am, does this work?
It works, yeah.
Since I'm the one who is responsible for the crime of mentioning the crime of Zionism, I will try to reiterate what I said Zionism should be considered as a crime, like Nazism and apartheid are crimes against humanity. Zionism will be considered a crime against humanity. The soft talk about Zionism being diverse and it means many things to many people and it has many aspects, cultural and all these things, doesn't matter to me as a Palestinian. It matters what Zionism does on the ground and what it does on the ground since its establishment are horrendous crimes on daily basis. Like Ala said, the link to the land of Palestine is a Jewish linkage, is not Zionist linkage. Zionism is only one form of interpretation to this linkage. On the one, very briefly, the second point on Zionism and the recent history of Jews is that we cannot compare between crimes that were committed. We should not compare crimes that were committed by other countries. Zionism is a crime that stands by itself, by its own right, and justifying Zionist crimes by a Jewish Holocaust is not sophisticated.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Noah?
Please be brief if possible. Just in one sentence, when I said that we need to discuss the complexity of Zionism, I meant exactly that some of the people, for example, Ali, who spoke here, they take this discussion to the option to delete my identity and to tell me, no, Judaism is a religion, and I'm asking people to respect each other's definitions and each other's identities. Another thing I wanted to mention, there was something here that came up both from the audience and from Ami earlier, the question regarding the legitimacy of using the tools of the regime in order to fight against the regime. It came up in the context of parties and also in the context of law. I would like to voice my opinion. I think that we need to fight with all the tools we have. That is, when it is possible to fight through the law, then we should do so. When it is possible to fight through the parliament, then we should fight through the parliament. And simultaneously, of course, we always need to fight in the streets, to fight for the consciousness, to fight wherever we can. We cannot forsake any of these tools because this is a Jewish state, therefore the law is unjust. Of course, the law is unjust, and I will use this injustice in order to fight this injustice as much as I can. Okay, thank you. Shukran.
I wanted to answer 3 questions, but I'm sorry, I think I only have time for one. So I will address what Kusai was saying about the Ramadan, the Friday Ramadans. I'm not sure people are aware that there were a lot of permits issued for Palestinians to go in through the month. But even more significant to me was on Friday, all women were allowed in and all men over 40 were allowed as if it was like this fantasy where the wall didn't exist. You just walk through. I mean, you had to walk through all the things, but you weren't stopped and you had theoretical freedom to go. And the idea was that everyone could go to pray in Al-Aqsa. That was the idea. But many people went and veered left. And they went to the beach, Haifa, Akka. And I would have 2 reasons why not as many people, Palestinians, went to their villages. One, I think logistically, because you're on the other side now. How do you get a car? How do you get to the remote village? And I think that was I know in the discussions and people that we were all planning the trips to the village. But number 2, I don't see anything wrong with that because the beach and Haifa and Akka are also Palestinian refugee spaces. They're more public. They're the urban centers. They're the natural resource, the beach. I went in with all my relatives and my husband, who was an ex-prisoner, and my brother-in-law was wanted for many years, and we all went in and we went to the beach. And we felt they felt very empowered because they were doing Auda for a day, not to the village. But the beach was part of Palestine, and it was a sense that I am going back to this space, sort of reclaiming the space.
Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry for not answering the other questions.
Yeah, Yeah, okay. Munir and Layla, and we'll finish with it.
أنا بالعربي يمكن بعلق على شيء بسرعة. السؤال الأول
I would like to comment briefly on something. The first question was about consulting with the DPs and refugees, and indeed, it is from the experience of transitional justice, and especially in the truth committees, they did use this thing. There are many examples for committees that came out and spoke with the DPs and refugees, and they asked them what their opinion is. And this is something adopted by the state. They had asked them and consulted with them, and ultimately they did take their opinion into account, at least in Palestine itself. And I'm not talking about the leadership, not at this stage, but there are some informal initiatives taking place that are happening.
All right. Yeah, last sentence from Layla. You open the conference, you close it, please.
Well, then I can't say what I wanted to say because it's not a closure statement. But it's very interesting because at the end of the conference, we resurrect this, or we ignite this debate over Zionism, which wasn't a part of the conference.
Yeah.
But I think, you know, many people in this room, if not everyone at this point in time, somehow think that the notion of, that everyone somehow thinks that we're going to have to live together, Palestinians and Israelis. How you do it, it's not clear. It has to be worked out. We know refugees are part of the equation. And so if you think of it, if that's the objective that we're all looking at, of course Zionism is important, but what becomes even more important is the notion that was articulated, and that is Jewish privilege. Because that is the obstacle one will have to get over in order to create an entity where refugees can come to and live safe and happy, dignified lives. So, you know, I think obviously Zionism is an important part of the equation, but maybe we should refine the question a bit more amongst audiences that, you know, clearly want to get to the next phase.
Okay, thank you. بالعربي لسه. أولاً شكراً لكم جميعاً بس.
First of all, I'd like to thank all of you. And I wish to remind you that we started out with a certain topic and we referred a certain question, but you open up a different subject. Maybe it's because of the time of maybe it's a weakness or a strength of this discussion. Sometimes you decide on questions and then go elsewhere to new spaces. You open a discussion on a new subject, and it's as if we started the conference all over again. And this gave me a feeling that there was some kind of a withdrawal in our feeling, because we felt that we did make some progress and did overcome certain obstacles, and all of a sudden we started discussing a problematic and complex topic. Therefore, I would like once again to thank everyone, to thank all the people here, and I'd like to thank those who came yesterday and those who came today. Sorry? I would like to thank whomever we need to thank. I will soon do that. Everybody's concerned with the interpreters. I would like to thank the interpreters. Let me remind you that we still haven't finished yet. There's another part ahead of us. The director of Zochrot wishes to say goodbye, and we would like to thank her as well. She deserves our thanks.
Okay.
Well, I'll be speaking in Hebrew. I know that those of you who have survived these two very dense and packed days, thank you for staying in, so I'll be very brief. I thought to start out by thanking all those who worked so hard in the past 6 months over this conference, but actually I think we should begin at a much earlier stage. I'd like to thank all those who made sure that the conditions will ripen to hold such a conference, And so my first thanks goes to, first of all, the people who founded this organization, Eitan Bronstein, who founded this very important and special organization. I would also like to mention in this context Norman Musi, whom along with Eitan was involved in the establishment of this organization and one of the formative documents written in Hebrew about the return, and definitely the very small team. I don't know if you know this, but we're a very small team. Debbie Ferber, Amaya Galili, Raninja Reyes, who was behind the camera all day long, Yelet Kessler, and definitely Omar Uberi, who coordinates the field of return in Zochrot, and he's in charge of this entire conference. I would like to say that it is a great privilege for me to be part of this team. I would like to thank all of our partners who support Zochrot, and a special thanks to AFSC, who funded a significant part of this conference. And I would also like to thank the organizations that cooperate and have cooperated with us over the years. I'd like to especially thank Badil, which is a very significant organization, and other organizations which were part of the projects you saw today. Baladna, the Arab Association for Human Rights, and the DP's committee, the board of Zochrot, and the steering committee that in the past 6 months had met once a week for 4 hours, on top of everything else they did in order to produce this conference. Michal Ran, Jumana Abu Aksa, Debbie Ferber, and Asaf Kedar. Special thanks to Moran Barir, who helped us greatly in producing this conference. To all the volunteers today, I would like to thank all of you. Of course.
I don't forget anything. Thank you for all the speakers, especially for those of you who came overseas, to Laila Ilal, to Terry Rampel, to Dominica Blanchica, and to Mariana Thomas. Sorry? It keeps bothering me. תודה למתרגמים ולמתרגמות. ותודה אחרונה ומיוחדת.
I'd like to thank the interpreters as well, and one last special thanks to our phenomenal producer, Niva Greenswag, who really... Where is she? I would like to thank Niva, who made sure that we all do what we had to do, and I'd like to thank all of you for coming, and I truly hope that this was an instructive and enriching conference.
Thank you very much all. Thank you. You are free. Just to remind you, سفر الكتاب عودة.
The book out.